Today we're going to be talking about Appalachian language, specifically words and phrases that start with the letter I. And I'm using the Dictionary of Smoky Mountain English for reference. So the first one that I was going to share is one I have never heard. So it's I've been or I been. Well, you say, well, I've said that a million times, so have I've been. But it's the unusual usage that's noted in the dictionary that I have never heard. So it says, 1939 Hall collection, come in and eat something with us. No, I've been, is what the person said. I've already eaten. So I've been meant I've already eaten. 1975, Jackson, unusual words, a man invited to dinner. I've been. And then it says, a telescoping of the longer answer, I've already been to the table. So I have never heard that usage here in my area of Appalachia. A sort of similar one to that I hear often, and I use it myself, is it's been a being. So Matt might say, Tipper, it's got cold weather again. Have you seen my vest that I was wearing last year or whatever? And I might say, well, it's been a being in the hallway closet. Why don't you look there? Or it's been a being in our closet. So it's been a being. It's like whatever it is being. It's actually been sitting in there being this whole time until you were looking for it. So we do use that one. I wish I could show you. I have a whole, oh my goodness, they're still coming. Crows everywhere. Probably 50. Can you hear them? I'm sure you can hear them. I love crows. Crows are my favorite bird. One year I did a whole series about crows on the Blind Pig and the Acorn. I will link to some of that below. In fact, I had a multitude of crows come and see me back then. I had a little help, but I'll put those links if you're interested about crows. So the next word is idea, I-D-E-A. Well, it means just what you think it means. But there's variant forms, or ideal, ID, or idea. Some people put an R on it. So idea, it's hard for me to say it because I'm one of the people that use one of those variants. I say ideal. If you've watched my videos for a long time, you've probably already heard me say ideal. I had an ideal. I say ideal. I'm not sure who I learned that from, but that's how I say it. I've heard people say idea. I've got an idea or an idea. They put an ER on it. So those are just the variant forms. So in 1936, Math's tall tales, Cole, the officer, said quietly, I guess you don't know what I've come for. No idea at all, drawled Granson. 1940, Sims collection, a mountain man wanted to know who and what give the Outlanders the idea that we-uns, the mountain people, are a lot of hell-going trouble raisers. That one's kind of funny, but I kind of agree with him. I don't know who told people that we were all hell raisers or moonshiners or whatever, but it's not true. 1942, Hall Phonetics, just that it was documented. Hall Collection, Townsend, Tennessee. I don't know what their ID was. So that one's still very common in my area of Appalachia. I would say probably there's not as many people that say ideal like I do that put the L on it. And I don't think that Granny says it, and I'm not sure that Pap even said it. I'll have to question Granny about that and see if that was one that Pap said, if that's where I learned it. So the next one is if, I-F, and it's just saying that there's a variant form of F, like EF instead of IF. And it just gives some examples that's what it was, that was noted in all these different places. And that's one, like, I think that's not common, but then if I listen to myself say if, I probably say F instead of if. That's probably one that I think I'm saying if, but I'm probably actually saying F. So that one's just a usage, a pronunciation. The next one is if'n. If'n you don't mind, go ahead and call her and tell her to come over. So that one says it means if, same thing, we just have to add some letters to it. So 1939 Hall collection, Cherokee, North Carolina. If and you folks now knows anything about when the Confederate War ended, why you can just tell how long I've been in Jackson and Swain. So that was somebody that was living in Jackson and Swain, and they were saying if and you know when the war ended, then you know how long I've been here. That was a long time. 1942, Hall phonetics, come into the fire if'n you'ns want to. If'n. So that one's, I would say that one's pretty common still in my area of Appalachia. You'll have to let me know if it's common where you live. So the next one is not really a word, it's a suffix, so it's IFIED, and it says added to nouns and adjectives to form adjectives such as faintified or girlified. I would also say I've heard prettified. Matt uses that, prettified. You've got all prettified. So 1967, dare, faintified. That's another one, faintified, if you're feeling faintified. Having a sudden feeling of weakness when sometimes the person loses consciousness. That was in Maryville, Tennessee. 1975, the Great Smoky Mountain National Park. We'd trim him and turn him loose, and he wouldn't be so fighty-fied. So he was a fighter. He wouldn't be so fighty-fied. 1981, Whitener, Folkways. Of course, modern long handles are a far cry from those of bygone days. They have been prettified, thermified, and advertised until they have achieved social acceptance. So, thermified and prettified. There was the prettified I mentioned. The next one is a phrase, an interesting phrase. If the world's yon way. If the world's yon way. So it's a phrase, a favorite emphatic expression among older speakers in the 1930s as observed by Joseph Hall. So the next one is a phrase, an interesting phrase, if the world's yon way, if the world's yon way. It says a favorite emphatic expression among older speakers in the 1930s as observed by Joseph Hall. 1895, Edison and Fairchild, Tennessee Mountains. If the whole world's as big every way as she is that-a-way, she's a whopper. 1959, Hall Collection, Hartford, Tennessee. There were a number of the neighbors would come in and ask her what she thought of the world beyond the mountain, and they asked her how big it was, and she said, Lordy me. She said, if the world's as big that way, pointing the opposite direction as it is that way, pointing out towards Cosby, my God, it's a golly whopper. And that was J. Lacey Barnes. So that's an interesting one. I might have heard, I've not heard, I don't guess I've ever heard that. I mean, I've heard the world and yon way used a lot, but I don't guess I've ever heard that phrase in exactly that manner. So the next one is really, really common where I live and probably common throughout the South, but it's the word ill, I-L-L. It's an adjective of a person or an animal. To not just mean sick, though, if you're not feeling well, it means angry, vicious, or harsh, especially as ill as a hornet, as in ill as a hornet, the dictionary notices. I've also heard like ill as a old wet hen, so there's a lot of those kind of ill sayings. 1895, Edson and Fairchild, Tennessee Mountains. The cow is ill when she is pestered. Pestering someone will make them ill, even a cow. 1913, Capehart, our Southern Highlanders. It's the younger dog that's ill. So I guess that was a dog that was kind of mean. 1939, Hall Collection, Gatlinburg, Tennessee. He was an awful ill teacher. He was an awful ill teacher, so he must have been a grouchy teacher. Towstring Creek, North Carolina. We understand your ill way of talking. That was Grady Mathis. He's as ill as a hornet, said of a person who's been on a drunk or had a bad night of any kind. So ill as a hornet or ill as a old wet hen is still common here, but especially the word ill. Why are you so ill? You know, why are you being hateful, or why are you being mean? Or she was so ill nobody could stand her. So that one's very common where I live. And then another one that kind of goes off that is just, it's not really, I don't find this one unusual, so you'll have to tell me if you do, but it's just ill-able. If you're ill-able, like I might say, Granny is ill-able to run a marathon. She's not going to be able to do that because she's too feeble, so ill-able. It just means unable, ill-able. See, that one just don't seem strange to me, but it is in the dictionary. I'll be dogged, or I'll be dawed. I've never heard the dawed one, but I'll be dogged is just an interjection, an exclamation or mild oath, often prefaced by well and will. So let's see, 1997 Montgomery Collection, I'll be dogged, known to 9 consultants. That one's still really common here, so somebody might tell you something that you can hardly believe, or maybe you see something and you'll say, well, I'll be dogged. So that one's still common here. And probably in lots of other places, I would think. So ill-convenient, that's another one that's kind of like the ill-able, ill-convenient, instead of saying inconvenient. So ill-convenient, just not suiting, it means the same thing. And I do hear that one. This next one is another phrase, I'll tell you what's the truth. A common exclamation used to emphasize a following assertion. I'll tell you what's the truth. I've heard that one, I'll tell you what's the truth, but I've also heard, I'll tell you what. So I heard that one a lot. Pap had a dear friend of the whole family, LC, and he was kind of known for that, I'll tell you what. So people, other people would kind of say it with a nod and a grin because they loved him and would use it too, but that one's pretty common here. This is one that goes back to the ill. It's just ill-tempered, which you can already guess from that definition. If you're ill-tempered, means you're in a really bad mood, and maybe you're even, you know, have a really bad temper, and you're being spiteful. So if you're ill-tempered. Here's another interjection is I mean. So you might say, I mean those green beans was good, or I mean that boy can play the piano. So that just means I'll tell you, I swear, either before or after, you know, something that you're saying. Like I said, I tell you that boy can play. So that one's pretty common. Here's another example, kind of the suffix, putting those on at the end, but instead of the one that the book shared a minute ago, it's using EST. We use that one a lot to do that too. So we say, instead of just important or most important, we might say that he thinks he's the most importantest man there. That one's really common. That's what I would say. If I was talking about someone, whether it's correct or not, I would say he thinks he's the most importantest person there, and he's not. It's usually when you're saying that about somebody, it's because they're not. They're not the most important. Another phrase, in and about, which just means more or less, approximately. 1971 Dyer Dictionary for Yankees, approximately a gallon in and about. So I've not really ever heard that one, but it's just like saying give or take, I guess, in or about. So this next one is one that I've not really heard as much as I've read about, is an infare. I-N-F-A-R-E, infare, is a noun. The dinner following a wedding, usually at the home of the groom's parents, with much merrymaking and dancing, replaced in more recent times by the wedding reception. And this term was not heard by Joseph Hall. So I'm glad it mentioned Joseph Hall again. A minute ago I wanted to say something about him and then I forgot. So Joseph Hall come to the Smoky Mountains in the late 20s and early 30s to document those people that lived in the area where the Smoky Mountain National Park is today, those people that lived there, got more crows, to document their language. Well, he made a real relationship with those people, and he ended up coming back over the years lots of times and recording them and documenting language. And so this dictionary is actually based on a lot of his work. And if you Google or search his name, Joseph Hall, you can find other books that he wrote about the area. He did not write this book, but Michael Montgomery used his work as part of the reference materials for the dictionary. So he did not hear the word infare. 1834, Crockett narrative. At our next meeting, he set the day for our wedding, and I went to my father's and made arrangements for an infare and returned to ask her parents for her. So they were getting ready to get married. Let's skip on down. There's a whole lot of those, but let's go all the way to 1991, Haynes Haywood home. Infares were put on by the groom's parents and were wedding feasts, suppers. They started at least a week ahead to get everything ready. The best cooks on Fines Creek, Arch Crabtree, were invited to make sure everything was all right. After the couple was married in church, the wedding party went to the groom's parents' house for the infare. After supper, there'd be music and square dancing with local musicians playing. Then about 9 or 10 p.m., all the guests would escort the bride and groom to their assigned sleeping quarters and inspect the room before they said goodnight. So, very interesting. Some of you, if you watch the Girls Channel also, you probably know there's a wedding in our future. So, anything about weddings is interesting to us at this time, especially. This next one is really interesting because when Matt and I were first married, almost 30 years ago, but when we first met and after we were together a while, we compared, some stuff he said I thought was funny and some stuff I said he thought, well, I said that twice, but it's probably true. He thought more stuff that I said was funny. But one or two things that he said I thought were funny. Anyway, we only live grew up maybe 4 counties away from each other, but it's amazing in Appalachian language how different from sometimes even not just county to county, but holler to holler even, how different usages can be found. Anyway, this is one that he used that I could never understand, and it's just a prepositional phrase, and it just is in under. It means beneath, below, underneath, all those kind of things. But instead of saying it fell down there, he would say it fell in under. It fell in under the TV. Get down there and look. So 1939 Hall Collection, Deep Creek, North Carolina. When I got out to the bear pen gap while the dogs was a-fighting the bear right in under the top of Old Smoky. Pretty close up to the top. That was Mark Cathy. 1964 Williams Prep Mountain Speech. Telescoped clusters of prepositions are discernible in often, off from, outen, out from in, nunder, in under, outnumber, out from in under, out from in under. I don't know if that's, I misread it, out and under. That's a hard one to say, out and under. I was going to say, I don't think it has nothing to do with number, but I was misreading it, out and under, out from under. Anyway, and then another one, 1969, we'll have to go right around this in under those big pines. So Matt would say that all the time, that something fell in under or look in under. And I'm like, how do you look in under? It's just under it. It's not in it, it's under it. Another one that comes to mind that kind of the same kind of vein that he would tease me about is we say, like if somebody was mopping the floor or something, I'd say, be careful and don't slide up, I just mopped. He says, how can you slide up? You never slide up, you slide down. That's just two of the things that we would tease each other about, especially in the beginning. We're used to each other about it now. So another one, you've probably, if you've watched my videos, heard me talk about this one. I have a great cake recipe, my favorite cake of all time, and this is getting to be the time of the year where I start making those cakes, is an Irish potato cake, but it's an Irish potato. So this is Irish potato is a noun, and the variant forms are Irish, which is what we would say, Irish potato, or Irish tater, which we would both kind of say both of them. So the common white potato with Irish added to distinguish it from a sweet potato. So that's exactly right. When I was growing up, Pap and Granny, if Granny was cooking supper, she might say, do you want Irish taters for supper or do you want sweet taters for supper? So that was one very common in my whole growing up years, and I still use that one, and Granny still uses it, so it still is at least alive and well here. But I'll link to that cake recipe. Best cake, hands down, that I've ever tasted. It's my favorite cake recipe to make, and in that video I tell more about the recipe, so you can, if you're interested, you can learn more about it there. So the last one that I'll share is another interesting one, and you may have already seen, I have a video about it too, so I'll link to that one, but it's ivy. It's also ivy bush or ivy tree, the mountain laurel tree, same as calico bush and mountain ivy. So it's an interesting thing in Appalachia, throughout Appalachia, especially here in southern Appalachia. So you have what we would call ivy, which is actually mountain laurel that grows. Right nearby you have what we call mountain laurel, which is really rhododendron. So I did a video about how those terms kind of come to be, but in my lifetime that's what they were always called. Well, a lot of people, when I talk about how pretty the ivy is in the spring of the year, might say, well, ivy doesn't bloom because it's the green stuff that takes over trees, but it's, to most Appalachians, or to a lot of Appalachians, it's not. Ivy is the bush, which is really mountain laurel, that's blooming in the spring of the year. So that's another interesting video that I will link to, and you can check that out. So let's see if there's any examples of that one. 1982 Stubka wildflowers. Usually the attractive pink or white saucered flowers are so abundant that the mountain laurel in full bloom is one of our most spectacular plants. It flowers in May and June. The later blossoms ordinarily occurring on plants growing in the higher altitudes. Ivy and calico bush are among its other names. 1928, Galen plant naturalist. Mountain laurel, known to the mountaineer as ivy, reaches its maximum development in the Smokies. It is not unusual to find laurels 1 foot or more in diameter and many feet high. There's some pretty big ones here where I live too, up the creek. They're just beautiful. Laurels and ivy, or whatever you want to call them. If you want to call them mountain laurels and rhododendron, which I would call ivy and mountain laurel, are just beautiful. They speak to my childhood, but to my home. They surround my house in the spring of the year. In the winter, they hold on to their green leaves, so they're still there. They're just part of who I am, for sure. I have a little buddy here. Go ahead, go. You're flying slow today. All the bugs are flying slow because it's getting cold. My last one I'll share with you is ivy sickness, which is kind of connected to the one we just read. So ivy sickness is the sickness that cows get from eating the leaves of the mountain laurel bush. I've never heard of cows having ivy sickness, but maybe you have and you can tell me about it. So I hope you enjoyed hearing a little bit about Appalachian language, all these words and phrases that start with the letter I. It's always fascinating to me, no matter how many times I read the dictionary. I can always jog my memory or make me think or prick my brain, make me study on something every time I read it, even if it's the same things I've used. I've been using this dictionary since 2008, so I've been using it a long time. But I hope you'll leave a comment, let me know which ones you were familiar with, maybe which ones you never heard of. And as always, I hope you'll continue to drop back by and help me celebrate Appalachia, which of course includes a whole lot of Appalachian language.